Have you ever heard English in your head, but in someone else's voice, not your own? What if the real secret to fluency isn't more grammar or vocabulary, but training your brain to live in English? Hello, my name's Angelina. I want to share something very personal with you, my journey of how I learned to think in English. For a long time, I struggled. I knew words, I could read and write, but every time I tried to speak, my brain froze. I was stuck between the language I was born into and the one I truly wanted to live in. This is the story of how I rewired my brain little by little to stop translating and start thinking in English. And if you've ever felt the same, this story might just change everything for you too. It all began on a chilly October evening as I walked home from my evening ESL class in Chicago. The sun had already dipped behind the city skyline, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh rain and fallen leaves. The streets were busy, but I wasn't really paying attention. I had my earbuds in, but I wasn't listening to music. Instead, my mind was trapped in a loop of frustration. Earlier in class, we were supposed to practice introducing ourselves in English. A simple task, right? But the moment it was my turn, I froze. I knew what I wanted to say, but the words just didn't come out. My thoughts were stuck in my native language, and trying to translate every sentence into English felt like wading through quicksand. My teacher smiled patiently, and my classmates were encouraging, but inside, I was disappointed again. I had spent months studying English grammar, memorizing vocabulary, and watching American shows on Netflix. I could understand English, but why couldn't I speak it smoothly? That walk home was different. I wasn't just tired, I felt defeated. And in that quiet frustration, a powerful thought surfaced. Maybe the problem isn't my mouth. Maybe it's my brain. Maybe my brain just wasn't used to living in English. That night, something shifted. I went home, made myself a grilled cheese sandwich, and sat at the kitchen table thinking. My thoughts were, of course, in my first language. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I realized I only used English when I had to, during class, or when texting my American coworker, or ordering food at Chipotle. But the rest of the time, especially when I was alone, I defaulted back to my native language. That was the pattern. And if I wanted to change my English, I had to start with what happened when nobody was watching. The next morning, I decided to experiment. As I was brushing my teeth, I told myself in English, I need to buy more toothpaste. That was it. Just one sentence. It felt weird. My tongue didn't move the way I wanted it to. The sentence didn't sound natural in my head, but I kept going. While getting dressed, I thought, should I wear the black hoodie or the red one? As I poured coffee into my travel mug, I whispered, don't forget your umbrella. These small inner sentences became the building blocks of a new habit. At first, it was slow and clumsy. I often had to pause and think of the right words. Sometimes I couldn't find them, and I'd switch back to my own language without even noticing. But then I made a rule. No translating. If I didn't know how to say something in English, I'd simplify it instead of switching languages. For example, instead of thinking, I need to schedule a dentist appointment for next Thursday, which was too long and difficult, I would think, call dentist, Thursday morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was English, and my brain was slowly adjusting. I started to notice patterns in my thoughts. I realized I had thousands of daily thoughts, what I needed to do, how I felt, what annoyed me, what made me smile. All of them were opportunities to practice English quietly and safely without fear of judgment. While waiting for the bus, I'd think, the bus is late again. Maybe I should get coffee while I wait. While doing laundry, I'd say in my mind, don't mix whites and colors this time, Angelina. When I burned toast one morning, I laughed and said aloud, you had one job. Slowly, my thoughts in English started to feel more natural, not forced, not rehearsed. And I began to feel something even more important, connection. I was connecting with myself in a new voice. It didn't sound like my textbook voice or my ESL teacher's voice. It sounded like me, just me, thinking and living in English. This small change, switching the language of my inner voice, had a ripple effect. I became more confident. I started noticing how often people talk to themselves in public, muttering at grocery stores, talking to their dogs, laughing to themselves in cars. Americans did this all the time. So why was I so afraid to do it? I started whispering thoughts under my breath while shopping. Eggs, milk, almond butter. What else? I wasn't trying to perform. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just practicing being me in English. And the more I did it, the more automatic it became. My brain stopped translating everything. I was starting to think directly in English, and that changed everything. I remember one night I was walking along the riverfront, enjoying the lights reflecting off the water. A couple nearby was talking about their dog's Halloween costume. I smiled, not because of what they said, but because I understood every word instantly. I didn't have to translate. I didn't have to decode their conversation. It just made sense. And that's when I realized the way we speak to ourselves becomes the way we speak to the world. I had trained my brain to think in English by choosing to live in English, even in the quiet moments. I didn't need a classroom. I didn't need a partner. I needed a decision. But I didn't stop there. As my inner voice became stronger, I wanted to push myself further. I began to imagine real conversations, ones that hadn't happened yet, but might. Like talking to my manager at work, or chatting with someone at a party, or ordering at a cafe without pausing to translate the menu. I started planning those talks in my head, word for word, feeling how they might sound. I would think through different versions, testing out phrases, hearing how they fit together. I began to ask myself, what would I say if someone asked me about my weekend? Or, how would I introduce myself at a company meeting? These weren't just imaginary thoughts. They were mental rehearsals. And without realizing it, I was preparing myself for real-life conversations. My brain wasn't just thinking in English anymore. It was living in English situations, even when I was totally alone. That led to one of the biggest breakthroughs in my journey. One Saturday morning, I was standing in line at a coffee shop. The woman in front of me was talking with the barista about her order. As I waited, I imagined the barista turning to me and asking, "What can I get started for you?" I mentally rehearsed my answer. "Hi, can I get a tall vanilla latte with almond milk, please?" When it was my turn, I said it, just like I had practiced. It came out naturally, smoothly, without hesitation. I walked away from the counter, holding my coffee, and smiled to myself. It wasn't just the caffeine, it was the power of preparation. I had thought it through in English before I ever said it out loud, and that gave me confidence. From that moment on, I started doing it everywhere. Before phone calls, before interviews, before running errands. I'd think through the conversations in my mind, using English, hearing my own voice. Sometimes I'd even speak them aloud while getting ready in the morning. My bathroom mirror became my first speaking partner. These imaginary talks weren't silly, they were powerful. They taught my mouth and brain to work together. They helped me respond faster, think clearer, and speak more naturally. And the best part? I wasn't depending on anyone else. I was training myself, anytime, anywhere. Thinking in English didn't come from a textbook. It came from a choice to use my quiet moments as practice, a choice to speak to myself in the voice I wanted to share with the world, a choice to stop waiting for the right time and make every time the right time. The more I did it, the more fluent I became, not just in words, but in life. English stopped being something I studied. It became something I lived. And as I continued this journey, I found myself wanting more. Thinking in English was one thing, but I wanted to take it further. I didn't want to just think sentences. I wanted to simulate real conversations, not just words, but reactions, emotions, pauses, choices. I wanted to build confidence in talking to others, even when they weren't there. So I took the next step. And it all began during one of those quiet self-talk moments right in the middle of my kitchen when I asked myself in English, what would I say if someone knocked on my door right now and asked me a question? That question sparked something powerful and led me to start building full conversations in my mind, just like real life. It all started that afternoon in my kitchen, standing next to the sink with soap on my hands and a dirty plate in front of me. I had just asked myself in English, what would I say if someone knocked on my door right now and asked me a question? I didn't even think twice. The question popped into my head, and without planning it, I was creating a scene in my mind. I imagined a delivery guy showing up and saying, "Hi, I have a package for Angelina. Can you sign here?" And then in my mind, I answered, "Oh, sure. Thanks so much. Have a good day." It was short, simple, but it felt real. I froze there for a moment, hands still wet, and realized something big. That right there was a full conversation in English, even if it only existed in my mind. That's when it hit me. I could start training my brain for real conversations by having fake ones. Not just random thoughts. Not just, I'm hungry or I need to do laundry, but actual back and forth exchanges, just like I'd experience in real life. The only difference, the other person wasn't physically there. So that evening, while sitting on my couch with a cup of tea and my phone charging nearby, I started again. I pictured myself calling a customer service number because I had a problem with my internet. In real life, that idea stressed me out. I was always scared I wouldn't understand the person on the other end of the line. But this time, I controlled the scene. I imagined myself dialing and the agent saying, "Thank you for calling. How can I help you today?" I mentally replied, "Hi, my internet is down and I've tried restarting it, but nothing's working." The agent asked follow-up questions, and I answered each one in my head. I pictured every step of the conversation, all in English, hearing both voices, mine and theirs. It was almost like watching a movie inside my head, but I was both the actor and the writer. This became my new obsession, in a good way. Any situation I could imagine, I'd turn into a mental conversation. Waiting at the dentist's office, I'd rehearse a dialogue with the receptionist. "Hi, I'm here for my 2 p.m. appointment." Walking through the grocery store, I'd picture a friend running into me and saying, "Hey Angelina, long time no see." And I'd answer, "I know, how have you been?" These weren't fantasy daydreams. They were strategic brain workouts. My mind was learning how to respond in the moment using English, not by translating, but by preparing. And the best part was, I didn't need anyone else to do it with me. At first, I kept the conversations short and casual. Things like ordering food, asking for directions, or making small talk. But over time, I started getting braver. I'd pretend I was in a job interview and the hiring manager asked, "Can you tell me a little about yourself?" That question used to scare me, but now in my mind, I practiced it again and again. "Sure, my name's Angelina. I recently moved to the US, and I've been working on my communication skills. I'm very organized, and I love helping people." Each time I mentally rehearsed it, I got better. I discovered better ways to explain things. I found simpler words when I got stuck. I even practiced my tone, how I would sound warm, confident, and calm. And even though nobody heard these conversations but me, they changed everything. Something strange started happening after a few weeks of doing this. When real conversations came up, at work, at stores, even just asking a stranger for help, I didn't panic like I used to. I wasn't caught off guard. Why? Because I had already lived those moments in my mind dozens of times. My brain had rehearsed. I wasn't starting from zero anymore. It was like athletes visualizing their performance before a big game. They don't just train their bodies, they train their minds. I was doing the same thing with English, and I didn't need a coach or a team or a classroom. I had everything I needed right inside my head. There's this moment I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, and I was sitting in a quiet cafe downtown, journaling in English. Another habit I had picked up to support my new way of thinking. A woman next to me accidentally spilled her coffee, and I instinctively handed her a few napkins and said, "Here you go. I think there's more over at the counter." She smiled and thanked me, and we ended up chatting for a few minutes. She asked what I was writing, and I told her I was practicing English. She said, "Really? You sound so natural." I was stunned. That compliment meant more to me than she probably realized. It wasn't because I sounded perfect. I didn't. It was because I sounded comfortable. That comfort came from the mental conversations I had been having for weeks. In my head, I had practiced that exact kind of exchange. Small, spontaneous, real. And because I had played it out so many times in silence, when it finally happened in real life, my brain didn't freeze. It flowed. I started using mental conversations like a rehearsal room before any event. Before I went to the doctor's office, I imagined the nurse asking, "Do you have any allergies?" And I answered in my mind, "Yes, penicillin." Before going to a friend's birthday party, I practiced how I'd answer questions like, "How do you know the birthday girl?" Or, "What do you do for fun?" It wasn't about creating perfect lines. It was about preparing my brain to respond naturally when the moment came. And it worked over and over again. At some point, these mental rehearsals became second nature. I'd walk down the street and imagine bumping into someone I knew. I'd picture them saying, "How's your week been?" And I'd reply, "Busy, but good. I've been working on a new project." The more I did it, the easier it got. And what surprised me most was how creative my brain became. It started suggesting better phrases, cleaner sentences, more casual expressions. I wasn't just practicing, I was improving. Every imaginary conversation was a lesson, and every real-life success was a reminder that this strategy worked. Eventually, I started combining this mental practice with speaking out loud. When I was alone at home, I'd act out the scenes I had rehearsed in my head. I'd stand in front of the mirror and say, "Hi, I'm Angelina. Nice to meet you." Or, "Could I get this in a size medium, please?" At first, I felt ridiculous, but soon it felt empowering. I was training my brain and my mouth to work together, not just thinking in English, but responding in English with real sound, real voice, and real rhythm. Even driving became a practice session. I'd talk to myself in the car, pretending to chat with a coworker or a friend. "How was your weekend?" I'd ask myself out loud. "Pretty relaxing," I'd answer. I watched a documentary and went for a walk by the lake. Nobody heard it but me, but those imaginary talks gave me real confidence. They filled the gap between silence and conversation. They gave me a bridge from thinking to speaking. What I found most powerful about this step was how it connected my private world with the public one. It allowed me to prepare for life, not just grammar tests or vocabulary quizzes, but actual life. The way people talk at the grocery store, the way they chat while waiting in line, the way they respond with short, casual phrases like, "No worries," or "You're all set," or "Sounds good." I started noticing these phrases in real life, and I added them to my mental conversations. It became a loop. Mental practice fueled real conversation, and real conversation fueled better mental practice. This step changed the way I saw English. It wasn't just something I had to study. It became something I could rehearse, refine, and actually live through in my mind. And that's when I realized fluency isn't just about speaking out loud. It's about being ready to speak. It's about practicing for the moments you haven't had yet. So when they come, you're not afraid. You're prepared. And it all circled back to those small moments I created in silence. From imagining a conversation with a delivery driver in my kitchen, to mentally preparing for job interviews, doctor visits, and random chats at cafes, I had built an entire world of English inside my mind before ever needing it in the real world. That's why I started feeling more fluent. Not because I had mastered every word, but because I had lived English before I even opened my mouth. But there was still one thing holding me back. In my mental world, I had all the time I needed to think. I could pause, rewind, rephrase. But in real life, conversations move fast. People talk quickly. You don't always get a second chance to find the right word. That's when I realized if I wanted to speak confidently in the real world, I needed to practice not just thinking in English, but responding quickly in English. I needed to train my mind to be faster, sharper, more automatic.